So you've joined speech and debate because you want to give cool speeches, you want to be able to compete by giving speeches, and you want to improve your communication skills. But the big question becomes, how in the world do you write a speech? Today we're going to talk through the basics of speech writing. We're going to talk about the basics of speech structure so you know exactly where to start. Now, everything that we're going to talk about today applies to a whole list of events. It doesn't apply to the acting events because you're interpreting a piece of literature, so it doesn't really apply there. And this doesn't really apply to debate, although debate you will find is similar when you're writing cases, but that's going to be a little bit different as far as what goes into each point. We'll talk about that in a different video. But as far as stuff today goes, this goes for impromptu, for extemp, for informative, ADS, for radio, oratory, pretty much all of the big speaking events this stuff applies for. Now, for those of you that have been doing high school English classes, a lot of this is going to look familiar because the way you write a speech is also very similar to how you write an essay. So if you've been looking at that and studying that, this is going to be familiar. You're going to know what you're doing with this. You're going to hear me preaching this over and over again because everything is about the same structure. Everything works the same, and this is how it works. First of all, you have an introduction. Now, we're going to talk about each of these things here in detail, but I'm just going to go through the quick rundown so you kind of get a sense of where we're going. First, you need an intro. Second, you need a thesis statement. Third, you're going to need a roadmap. Fourth, you need point 1, point 2, point 3, and finally, you're going to need your conclusion. And your conclusion, as we'll talk about in a minute, ties back to your introduction. So let's go through each of these things. First of all, you need an introduction, like I said. Introduction really needs to be something interesting. The thing you do not want to do is, let's say you're giving a speech about cats for some reason. You don't want to start your speech off with saying, "Today I'm here to talk to you about cats." Okay, boring. That does no good whatsoever. So you need to find some sort of a story, some sort of an example, something that, as I like to say, pulls people into the world of your speech. I write that all the time on ballots. Find something interesting for your introduction that pulls people into the world of your speech. This helps people really come into the point of view that you're trying to get. It really helps make the speech a lot more interesting. In all the interesting speeches that you hear, people start off with some sort of a creative, fun introduction. So you've got to come up with that. Second thing is going to be your thesis statement. This is nothing complex. This is simply the point of your speech. It's usually just a short sentence, and I'll go through that here in a minute. But this is just a quick little statement. Third is going to be your roadmap. Now, this is really key in competitive speaking because this is what's going to tell your judge exactly where you're going. I'll go through that more in a minute. 4 is point 1. This is the first point that you're going to make. You need to make typically 3 points. Just like in a good essay, you need to have 3 different arguments. Same type of thing here in a speech. Point 1, point 2, and point 3. And finally, your conclusion. Now, your conclusion needs to tie back to your intro. So you can say, at the beginning of my speech, I talked about blah, 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 blah. And then you use that to kind of wrap things up. That helps the speech feel more whole. It helps it feel more complete. It tells the judge, I'm about to end now. I'm wrapping up. They can always tell because you tie back to your introduction. That helps things feel complete is kind of the best word I would use for that. So this is what I'm constantly preaching over and over again. You're going to hear me constantly saying this. Does your speech have a structure? What I mean by that is introduction, thesis, roadmap, point 1, point 2, point 3, conclusion. This is what your speech has to have. Almost every public speaking event follows this exact structure. And one of the things that we're looking for as coaches and as judges is, are students following that structure? Do they have all of these elements in? Are they easy to spot? Now, doesn't mean you have to be for my next point. No, you can creatively write around that so that way your speech has some unique flow, but we've got to be able to see where those points are so that way we know what you're doing when you're giving the speech. Okay, so a few examples that I just want to kind of run you through really quickly. One of the things I'm always doing as a speech and debate coach is I'm always reviewing speeches. So I'm giving feedback. I'm saying, okay, add words here, all this kind of stuff. When you are writing speeches, I'm going to ask you to share your speeches with me. We're going to collaborate on those, and I'll help make sure they are ready to go. But these are some examples from that scenario. So for instance, in this speech, both of these speeches that I'm talking about today are radios that I've reviewed in the past. And what we've got here is an introduction. As a young boy, Grayson was an avid reader. He loved road trips to the public library to check out new stack of books. He enjoyed playing soccer during his elementary middle school years. Okay, this kind of goes and continues to go. What he's doing is he's introducing this character, or this person, his friend named Grayson, who unfortunately committed suicide. That is the point of his speech, is it's talking about suicide. So what we have here is this whole section here is the introduction. It's a way to explain the subject of the speech in an interesting, creative way that's not like, today we're going to talk about teen suicide. Okay. This is the introduction that does that. Now, next, let's get to more structure. And this is part of radio, which you'll discover if you do radio. This is Ben from KBCK, and today we're going to talk about how teen suicide has become such a large problem. That right there. Today we're going to be talking about how teen suicide has become such a large problem. That is his thesis statement. That's the whole point of his speech. Whittled down to a sentence, that is exactly what he's going to be talking about. So that's what we're looking for when I say thesis statement. The thesis does not come in the introduction. Do your introduction first to pull us into the world of the speech, then present that thesis statement. And then after his thesis statement, you'll see this thing we called the roadmap. The roadmap is how you're going to present, or how you're going to back up this thesis in your 3 points. He says, we will first talk about the latest staggering numbers showcasing the devastation of suicide and its causes. Second, how families and friends can get help while recovering from suicide. And finally, suicide prevention. So in one sentence, he said, here's my first point, here's my second point, here's my third point. That presentation of the points, that overview, is called the roadmap. And that's typically found right after your thesis. Here's the point of the speech, and then here are the 3 points that I'm going to be presenting to help get to that point. Okay, point 1. Point 2. Point 3 is on the next page. But you can see introduction, thesis, roadmap, which again is just an outline, quick 1 sentence long outline of your speech, where you're going. Points 1, points 2, and points 3, conclusion. Okay, let's try another one. Okay, so this is another radio that I was reviewing recently. And this starts off with another introduction. Granted, it's not like this big fun story because the topic's not fun. The introduction is appropriate for the subject matter at hand. It says, on Valentine's Day just a few weeks ago, a Florida high school student did the unthinkable. Every parent's worst nightmare as he entered Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, gunning down 17 people. Blah, 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 blah. Kind of talking about that big tragedy that happened over there. This whole thing, even though it's not the cheeriest of facts, is the introduction because it's a way to pull people into the world of this speech. Now, again, we're going to look for that thesis statement. This leads to today's question. She's pretty much putting it right out there. Are schools contributing to the stress level in today's teenagers? This is my thesis. Again, 1 sentence that's going to show where the speech is going. And then she says, she specifically and very succinctly lists her points. Too early start times, intense workloads, and test anxiety. Those are the things she's going to be talking about. So even though it's just a few words, she doesn't have to go on and on and on about it. In just a few words, she says point 1, point 2, point 3. Okay, so now she goes. First, school starting times. Let's talk about that. And she goes into that in her speech. Then at the end, she's going to reference what she started talking about here at the beginning of her speech. So again, that way it feels whole, it feels complete. There's a good conclusion there. So again, just to review, because every speech, every speaking event needs to have this. Introduction, pull us into the world of your speech. Second, a thesis statement. Third, roadmap. That's your quick list of your points so that we can easily see where you're going with this. Point 1, point 2, point 3, and conclusion, which ties back to your introduction. That is basic speech structure. Every speech needs it. memorize this, write this down, reference this somehow, because you're going to need it when you start writing your own speech, which you need to be doing soon because competition is starting very shortly. So, as a coach, let me know if you have questions about that. But remember, this is speech structure, and this is what you're going to need to write every speech. Now, one other thing I want to quickly pull into here into how to write a speech to make sure that everyone understands a few limitations, especially based on some problems we've had in the past. Not just our team, I'm talking throughout the state of Oregon. Let me set up a scenario for you. You're trying to find an idea for a speech, and you stumble across an article on the internet, and this article just puts things so well. I mean, it's really nice. The speech just flows. This sounds great. And you think, you know what? I'm just going to take this and use this for one of my points. Don't do that. That is plagiarism. And the speech that you write needs to be written by you. Now, one thing to keep in mind here, not that I'm trying to scare anybody, but just, again, keep this in your brain as you're writing your speech. When it comes time for districts and it comes time for a state, all speeches are run through a plagiarism checker. That way they can check to make sure it doesn't line up with other written articles. It needs to be your own work. In the past, I've seen several people removed from the state championships from using plagiarized speeches. And we don't want this to happen to you. Again, I have to take the speeches that you write, submit them to the state. They are checked for plagiarism prior to the competition, and we do not want anyone removed. So when you come across that great article, you've got two options. First of all, you can make sure that you're taking their idea and you're writing it in your own words. You're not changing words within a sentence. This is your original work. But if that author does a really great job and you're like, this is just too perfect, you can use it. You just have to cite the source, which actually adds credibility to your speech. So you can say, according to this article in the Wall Street Journal by so-and-so, published on such and such a date, they said this, quote, blah, 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 end quote. Okay, so now you can still use that within your speech. Now you can present that great idea that you found that you like so much. Just give it the proper credit. Quote it correctly, and you can still use it. What you can't do is say, here's this great idea. I came up with it, when you really took it from somewhere else online. Now, one more quick aspect to this topic, and that is, let's say you find an article online where you're not going to use the paragraphs. You're simply going to use the structure. You're going to use the 3 points that this particular author may have come up with to back up whatever claim that they're making. Don't do that either. Each of your points need to be original to you. Because again, when they run it through the plagiarism checker and they find out that, hey, look, here's this article that was published online that has the exact 3 same points that you did, it could cause a problem. So simply avoid that. Your work needs to be your work. Your speeches need to be your original speeches. So make sure you're not taking from any sources, or it could come bite us later. You don't want to spend the entire season working on a speech only to be disqualified for it at the final leg of the season because it was a little too close to someone else's work. Keep that in mind.